Let us pray. As your Spirit has been here on and among the people for 162 years, as your Spirit has been with your people throughout time, may your Spirit be here among us, O God, as we enter into your holy story, your sacred word. For we still want you to be our vision and our wisdom, O ruler of all. Amen. Well, thank you. Thank you, Stephen and congregation, for inviting me back into this holy place. It is good to be here. And it was a good and lovely drive to come here. I'm only 4 hours away in Fredericton. So it was a lovely, abbreviated little road trip, and it was a solo road trip. There's something lovely about being in a car alone. The weather was perfect. You can crank the tunes up, the ones of your own choosing. No one can touch the dial or change the CD. There's something lovely about that. Your thoughts are yours. There's no need to talk. You can look about, watch for deer, enjoy what's passing by. And then I thought of another road trip, one that some friends have just recently completed. Theirs was not a solo road trip. They decided that they would take their 4 children and go off on a cross-country extravaganza. Yeah. You're shaking your head, aren't you? That's parents, right, of small children. What were they thinking? 4, all under the age of 10. Oh, I know. But they were so excited. We were certainly not going to rain on their parade. Oh, we've planned it and planned it. They said, all winter, we collected brochures and thought about it. It'll be fun, they said. It'll be educational. It'll be perfect. Road trips always sound that way before we start out on them. There's so much potential. Dreams, anything can happen. It all sounds so promising. The tank is full, spirits are buoyed, the snacks are fresh. Such potential. But somewhere along the way, maybe it's day 14 or day 3 or year 39 as it is for the Israelites in the story. But there will be a time, as any of us who have been on these road trips will attest, there will be a time when everything goes sideways. You know what it's like. Do you remember? Your sister was taking up too much room. Your brother didn't pass you the comic when he was supposed to in the allotted time frame. You're sick to death of looking at trees. And all of a sudden your father is threatening to pull the car over and leave you at the side of the road. Maybe that was just in my house. Because back then it wasn't considered a child abandonment issue, it was called building character. But don't make me stop this. But we weren't about to dampen the enthusiasm of these dear friends. We promised that we would text back and forth and we would love to hear what's going on with them. Ron, as you talked about technology for us today at the breakfast, see, we used that. They were on Twitter and they were texting us and all was going really well for the first few days. Then we noticed the texts were sounding just a little more terse as the days went on. They were getting shorter. We decided to FaceTime each other. I'm not sure if that was a good thing. The strain was beginning to show. They were shadows of their former selves, these parents. Oh, they said, you've no idea. Well, we do have some idea, don't we? We do have some idea. Because even if you didn't have the moment of lunacy where you headed off on a road trip with all sorts of people you are supposed to love and find suddenly very annoying, you do know this story of a journey because it's a story of our faith. It's a story of the people of God that we heard of today, the Israelites who are traveling together, jarring company along the way. It's a story of every particular group of faith, of a community of faith. It certainly is the story of this particular community of faith, of Grace United, over its 162 years. And you did a particular kind of journey where you invited particular people in to accompany you. You brought in student ministers. And like my friends, I think it's probably sounded great on paper. Somebody got this wonderful notion that it would be great to have students here. It would be fun, said Stephen. It'll be educational. Until we all began to arrive in the flesh with our own particular quirks and oddities, the particular learning goals that we wanted. Everything we thought we could wonderfully change or do or be. And there was that one particular one that decided she would be part of the choir. I don't think Malcolm had ever signed up for that. But there I was, part of the companion on the way. It's like that when you're journeying together. So maybe we can really understand Moses' bit of a breakdown at this point in the journey. What did I do to deserve all of this? Did I conceive of all these people, as Lorna read for us? Did I? He's absolutely livid because the people have been clamoring, demanding what they want, the way they think things should go. And right now, it's meat. They have decided they need meat in the worst possible way. For all of these years, they have been journeying, and they have been provided for by God's gracious care. Manna, this odd, flaky substance, has been faithfully provided to the people, and it has been nourishing them, letting them make their journey together for all of these years. But they have had enough of this flaky carb diet, and they want protein, and the cry goes out for meat. It is always a good thing to try to find yourself within a story, within our sacred stories. And I often think, well, I think I could find myself in that crowd, the rabble, as they were referred to, rather rudely, I think, simply because they wanted meat. I might have been leading that crowd, because here's a confession, I love meat. I like it all. Moose or turkey, even the mystery meats, sausages and hot dogs. Put them on a grill and I'm in. I can sympathize with these people who were in desperate need of something hearty and different from what they had been having. And so the clamor goes out. There's a lot of rather negative talk that theologians have done over the years on these people clamoring for meat. Well, they just weren't being very faithful because they should have just accepted that what God was offering was enough and it was what they needed. The fact that they were human didn't factor in, I guess. Or others will say, you know, those Israelites are having odd memories. They were slaves under the Egyptians. They might have sat near the flesh pots. They might have smelt the great smell, but it would have been the Egyptians that were eating that. They would not have been as slaves eating all the meat and those 12 different side dishes described. But the funniest thing about this story, which seems to be centered around the meat, it's really not about meat at all. It's about Moses and how Moses goes about handling the demands of the people. How Moses goes about dealing with those people that he is called to journey with and what they are expecting from him. And what does he do? He stops then and there. It looks like the journey may just end here. He might have just been pushed a little too far. And he says to God, I can't do this. I can't do this for one more day. I can't do it anymore. These people are going to do me in. And if that's your wish, God, then take me out now. Meat. They're clamoring at me for meat. Where will I find that? In this desert. I can't do this any longer. I know you called me to this work, oh God. But it has become too much to bear. Maybe you recognize that feeling too. Something that you have felt, the spark of the divine within you, that you believe in your heart that God, or for us that are followers of the way, that Jesus has somehow called your heart and soul to become part of. And it started out so well, but somehow along the way it has become, and you almost hate to admit it, but that wondrous calling has now become something of a burden. Maybe you know that. Because of your life, maybe simply trying to raise a family today, maybe simply trying to be your true self in the world today. Maybe you're working hard for a particular cause and you're about ready to stop. Maybe it's about being church in these challenging times. Sometimes your knees can truly buckle beneath you. But there is something about what Moses does. There is something in the stopping that could be the very end of it all. But it turns out it isn't. Because Moses, in all of his distress, in all of his recognizing that what was once a wondrous call is now a burden, he calls out to God because of this. Because he knows within his heart of hearts that even though it is too heavy to carry, it is also too precious to let it go. And so he calls out to the one who has called him from the beginning. And what he does next is to sit and to stop and to begin to draw breath and to begin to dialogue, to reconnoiter, to pray, to argue, to be in the presence of God, and to say, I need help because I cannot carry on like this. And it's an interesting word that God has for Moses. Because Moses seems to have done something very interesting. What had begun as a journey where he was following what God was asking for has somewhere along the way become Moses trying to appease the people with all of their demands and expectations. God never asked Moses to give them meat, but he almost ends it all because he was taking on that expectation as if that's what he needed to fulfill. And I know I do that sometimes. I wonder if you do too. And I wonder if maybe it feels easier to fulfill an expectation of another with us on the journey than it does to really, really keep going with God's call upon us. But a problem arises when we do that. not only will we become exhausted, spent, shaking our fist at the heavens like Moses, but we're also settling. And that's never a good thing to do as people of God, as people of the way. We never ought to settle. Because God never asks us to just do, this. Moses and the Israelites wanted what? The only thing they could think of. They wanted meat for supper. And sometimes, God help us, that's all we can manage. What do we make for supper tonight? It's as far as we can get on the to-do list of our life. But that's what God's idea is, nothing like that. God had this huge dream that was so much bigger than meat for supper. God had a dream of leading them into this amazing promised land where milk and honey flowed with abandon. Don't make this small, says God. And the stopping time that Moses had was precious time, because it was a time to stop and think about what it was he really was being called to. And I think he had his moment, standing there in that desert that he'd been wandering in for all those years with those people. But I think he thought back to another desert, to one where the voice of God first came to him and terrified him. And maybe he remembered then and there what it was that God asked him to do, to lead the people into freedom. Nothing small like meat, but to freedom, out of bondage, into freedom. And he must have remembered how his knees just about went out from under him and how his lips trembled. But where somehow the courage, which is all that God ever promises us, that the courage was there because he found himself saying, much to his surprise, I will go, Lord. And God said, I will too. And I will be right with you. For 162 years and counting, you have been following a path, taking a journey, or maybe 100 different journeys. One that changed along the way how many times, depending on who was with you on the way. What stayed the same was the Holy One, who first called this place into being, who first called all of us into being. God would never leave and will never leave. But how many times has God changed your mission in this world? How many times have you had to stop like Moses and say, what is it we're being called to? I know what it was 13 years ago because I had the great joy of being here. But it's something different now, and that was part of the joyful conversation I had with Stephen and then others at the men's breakfast. The notion of where you are now, that you've listened to see what is this wondrous calling to be the embodiment of God, to be Christ in this world. You're doing all kinds of different things. Music is still so much at the heart of things, but you're in a process to determine what it would mean to be an affirming congregation. You're learning what it is to open your doors wide to the community outside of these walls, and not only invite them in, but invite yourselves out there and to see how you might partner up with other churches, with other community members or neighbors. And where will it take you? And where will you go? God only knows. God only knows. But Moses knew. He had a renewed energy to go back out and do it. And so do you. Because I see the life that is in this place and all the new tiny life that is bubbling up in this place, along with those who have had the sacred seat for over 70 years. And none of it matters unless we're in it together. And you're called to be companions, and it will not be easy. It wasn't for Moses. It wasn't for any of us on those long car trips. And it isn't now. But here's the thing. It isn't going to be easy, because God didn't promise that either. Because God's dream is so big that God will not settle until all the brokenhearted are bound up, until all the hungry are fed, until all those awaiting justice receive justice, until every refugee finds a home. For 162 years, you have been finding your way. I give thanks that you let me be a part of that for just a little while. Here's to grace and the next 162 years. Will you pray with me? Holy God, you who have borne the weight of the world, strengthen us to share your work of love and justice and mercy. Renew us when we tire. Reignite us when we lose our spark. In the power of the everlasting God, may we carry on. Amen.